we'll take a look. So if we do a new flow on the top right, these are all the different types. So we went through screen flow and record triggered. And then there's also auto launched, which can be called from anything else like Apex, REST API. And there's also schedule triggered. So I use this to send happy birthday emails to employees and interns. So it'll check every morning at 9 o'clock once everyone's up and go ahead and send a happy birthday email if their birthday is that day when the schedule runs. So for this Cloud Ranger challenge, we want to go ahead and do a screen flow. Let's do create. And then it starts you down a wizard where you're just clicking these little plus signs, and you probably want to start off with a screen. So it doesn't really matter what you name the screen. So I can call it something like welcome. In certain contexts, it'll show the screen you're on's name, but not always. So it's not really that critical. It's also just so that when you're going back through the map here, that welcome shows us what screen it is in the path. Let's go in and edit it because the screen by itself doesn't have anything and doesn't do anything. So we can go ahead and add some different inputs, which we have on the left over here. So there's one specifically for name, which is pretty cool because it has first name, last name. You can specify if you want middle or salutation. The thing I don't like about it, and which is why I don't usually use it, is there's no required option for some reason. So a lot of times, just go ahead and add text fields for first name and last name. Get a little bit more control this way, and that way you can require them. So let's also go ahead and do one more text field for last name. Require that one too. And then email, I don't want to do a text field. A lot of these other components here, you can require. So here I can change this required to true. And then you can't just leave it at true. It actually wants you to select what they have down here as a global constant, which is really the same thing. But that's the syntax that they want. So let's say first name, last name, email. So what we're doing here is we're trying to collect information to start a case. So what else would we need is their subject, right? What are they really contacting us about that's critical? And to be specific, we might want to call it something like case subject and require that too. Something like my password doesn't work, or just a high level. And then to be able to explain what the real problems are, we'd want to make one of these long text area fields. Let's also require that and say case description. Pretty straightforward. One thing I do notice is that everything's just in a row, and usually you'd see kind of first and last together and some things grouped a little bit more. Oh, we might have one more field around priority, right? We want to know if this is super critical or it can wait a little while. So let's ask that here as well. So call this field priority. Picklist fields get a little tricky in what I'm about to do here, but it's pretty manageable. You don't really have to build this into your flow. I just wanted to be able to show you the next step of grouping these fields as well. But let's go ahead and add priorities. So we need to go ahead and add these choice resources. It's a little technical, but really I'm just adding a choice. Let's call it, I use the standard field name, so medium here and here. So this is kind of, if you wanted a different label, like it bolded or all kinds of formatting, you could do that. But really I just usually put API name, choice label, and value is all the same. And then you have basically medium. Do one more for high. And we could just double check what the priorities in our cases are, because people can modify those. you could change high to urgent, or you could have high and urgent. You could add as many as you want. So just take a quick check. We'd go back into Object Manager and go to Case, Fields, and Priority. So you have low, medium, high. Okay. Let's add our last one here as well. One more choice. This one's low. That's good. Okay, so I required that as well. And then now even more so, I just have a long list of fields. It doesn't look that great to me. So one cool thing I can add here in Flow Builder is this section to organize it a bit. And then that's still just one long section, but I could add a second column. I could play around with the widths as well, but I kind of like half and half. That way I can go first here, last here, email, priority. That's a little bit more what you'd see on a normal website to fill out a case. It's a little bit cleaner organized. And I think this screen looks really good. I think we have everything we need. The user really is not going to be able to get to the next screen without filling out all this information. Let's go ahead and click done. You can even save it at this point. We don't want to lose any of our work somehow if the tab gets closed. So let's call this contact support, case, whatever you'd want to call it. And it's saved without giving me any errors or anything. It would have actually complained if there were significant errors, so I know that at least nothing too critical has gone wrong. And at this point I can even interact with a little bit, I think, with the debug button here. And this is just kind of asking some technical debug info, but I can just bypass that and go ahead and try to test out the form, see if these react well, if I'm able to see already, if I go into a field that's required and I didn't put anything, it's going to complain that I need to complete the field. So you have that. And if I just try to click finish and I haven't completed subject or description, it complains about those and everything that's not filled out. And this will give you some cool technical info too. So we'll run the debug again as we try to make sure we're linking to an existing contact if there is one. All right, so that's going to be our next step, is we've collected the user info. And really, we don't want to create a new contact if there already is one in our system. So we want to go ahead and look for existing contacts with the same email. So I'm going to use a get records, which finds Salesforce records. And you could do this on both contacts and leads, but in this case, we're just going to look at contacts. Let's say find contact match. We can call it pretty much anything, but something that makes sense throughout your flow. And then I'm looking for a contact object. So you could do contact or lead or really any object you want, but those are the two that really have the email that we can compare to. So then I'm going to say the contact's email equals the email that was put in the screen component section here. So these variables that pop up are the choices, those don't apply. Pretty much everything pops up, but you're going to look for screen components and the email field that we add for them. You have to select value here since it's kind of a special field, but the email value is what we want to compare. And that should do it. So this is basically going to find any contacts that match that same email that was inputted. So if I click done, that's all good and well, but that doesn't do anything for us. We have to then make an action based on that. So we would use a decision as our next element. So we called this one find contact match. The way I like to name the decision is more of a question. So let's call it found contact match, question mark. And then here, put yes, but then you might have several yeses in your flow. So I actually like to copy this, put it in so that really even when we debug it, you're going to see the outcome was not just yes, but yes found contact match, which makes a little bit more sense. And then the default outcome is really when the criteria we're going to put in isn't true. In this case, I'm kind of making a yes, no, so default would be no. And only if we found a contact match are we going to do this yes path. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And really what we're looking for is this find contact match. And I don't care about a specific field. If I actually just click backspace there and just have find contact match, I can say is null false, right? Because what I care about is that found at least one record, which it's only set up to find one. So if it's not null, it'll find this. Go ahead and click done. So really that's all our decision element does, is create two pathways for us based on criteria. So if I go back in, it's really, I want to show you that one more time. So find contact match. Instead of picking a field here and checking if it's null, I care if the whole variable here is null. So that's what we do, is null false. We're good. So now we have our two different cases we can create, right? One that links to the contact match that we found, and one that just fills out a case with a supplied email and no real matching info. So let's go ahead and do that. Call this one create case with contact. We're gonna use a separate resource and literal values to just go ahead. Oop, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead and create the case. So what are we gonna supply to the case? The subject, that's what we collected. I like to just add a couple fields here because you know you're gonna add a bunch. We need description, priority. In this case, we have the contact. We know their account. And I think that's all we really need. The other screen that we're going to create the case without all this info is going to need more fields. But in this case, the contact has the email and the name and everything else. So let's go ahead, and in here we can start typing it out. So case subject, case description. So from the contact match, we're going to choose the ID, which is the contact ID. And then also from that contact match, we can get to that account ID, right? Because the account ID is on that same contact. So in that sense, we've got pretty much everything. So that's cool. Click done there. And then let's do another one for our no side when we don't know the contact and account. We want to store the email. So that's also create records. Create case from web. So we're going to use the web fields. They're also called supplied fields. I'll show you what they look like. So I type email here. This is supplied email. That means it's not a contact. It was just an email. Maybe it came in from web to case or email to case. But in any event, we can go ahead and use that field. So we're going to store our screen component email there. And then there's a few more supplied fields. So we can use the supplied name. And actually, we have two different fields for name. So this is a good point to show you a little bit of formula editing, which is also in this week's trail. So if I do new resource, I'm going to do a formula field for full name. A pretty easy one, but a decent little refresher. So our data type for full name is text. I'm going to go ahead and insert a resource. So first name, screen component. And then in this case, it actually wants me to go ahead. I need these curly brackets and the exclamation point. In the regular formula editor, you don't need that as much, but in here, you need to go ahead and put this kind of syntax in. So we're just combining the two names so that we can have a full name field populated here. We don't really know their company. We could have asked for that on that input form or the phone, but in this case, we're just going to assume we'll track them down by email. Let's put the rest of our fields. Okay, I think that's all we have. Okay, so at this point, we could create case either way. We'd also want to save right now and then probably debug it to test it a bit before we really move on to like a thank you final screen. So let's click debug one more time. It's going to pop up with these questions here of rendering things. It's not really important here. We're going to go ahead and fill out this form again. It's going to complain if we didn't fill it out. And I'm going to try first an email that I know is not in there, so we could just try to see it go through. We at least have unique values throughout, and we can see what happens here. So the cool thing about the debugger is you could see everything that happened here. We are able to see all the values in here, exactly what was set up. The contact match, so it failed to find records. You could see right here because I just put in a random email address. So then it created a case where it specified the supplied email and the supplied name, which the formula worked for the two fields. Very cool. So that's a good test. My next test, I'd want to make sure that it could find a contact. So let's just take a look at the contacts in my demo org here. I got my own, I figured. So let's try to change the inputs on this and run it again. This time for a match. So really name doesn't matter. It's really just searching for email matches. You could set it up to try to look for name matches. These can get pretty involved. At the end of this, I'll show you one that I'm working on for a customer that's pretty hairy. So let's go ahead and pick high priority or test. So this email does exist. It should link it to the right contact and account. So this time we could see find contact match, successfully found records, and then it linked. There is no account ID for that contact, I guess, but it did link the contact ID, and it would have if it was linked to an account. So it looks like our flow is running pretty good from a technical standpoint, but really it would leave the user hanging because there's not much else. They wouldn't see any kind of screen saying thank you and we'll contact you soon. So that's just the final piece here. And I like to show that after either of these branches, after our decision. So we could keep doing things down the no path or down the yes path, or after both paths are completed, we can do something, which is where I want to put my final screen. To say something like thank you. And then here we want to put display text. Put something like thanks is what we'll name it. It doesn't really matter. And then in here I'd put something like so then you have your final screen. You might even want to take off the previous button because it doesn't make much sense at this point. They've already submitted a case. Do you really want them going back and potentially submitting another one right away? Probably not. So I would actually, there's previous button, hide previous option. You also don't even need a pause. So in this case, it'll just let them finish and they're done.